I'm Jack Thornton. I'm a Boston University sophomore. I'm presenting to you today the Boston Planning Development Agency on Boston's queer spaces and a plan that we can use as a city community to better protect and preserve their importance. If you frequent the Fenway Kenmore neighborhood, you probably have at least some passing familiarity with the local gay bar Machine. And if you're someone outside of the LGBTQ plus community, you might make the mistake of assuming that Machine and other venues like it are little more than a nightlife hotspot. In reality, however, these venues are hubs for the community. They're places of gathering for ever-growing and developing LGBTQ plus representation throughout the city. Their purposes range from hosts for community fundraisers for particularly disadvantaged members of the community, to safe space for LGBTQ plus people learning to find pride in their orientation by engaging in a physical, tangible, active celebration of their sexuality. In such a major college hub like Boston especially, which draws students from places all around the world that might be less accepting of their sexuality, having available community spaces like these are incredibly important. Unfortunately, this year, Machine is set to close its doors so they can use the space for community housing. Now, of course, in any major metropolitan area, the use of housing is crucially important, and is in general a massive issue for the residents. The problem with this, though, is this puts Machine as just the next in an increasingly long line of LGBTQ plus venues that have closed in recent years, due to circumstances generally outside of the control of the organizers, owners, employees, and performers. From spaces like Rise After Hours, which is designed as an after-hours socialization place for gay people a safe space for gay people to celebrate after hours without risk of danger, to Paradise Nightclub, which at the time of its closure was the last remaining gay bar in all of Cambridge, the number of community spaces for LGBTQ plus people is rapidly diminishing. With this in mind, and given that these venues end up serving as de facto community centers for the LGBTQ plus people of the city, I've organized a plan that can allow for them to not just be protected, but enhanced and used to build a network of outreach and assistance for queer and trans people all across neighborhoods of Boston. I believe the city of Boston should reach out to venues across its neighborhoods that are at risk of closure and begin a process of converting those willing to enact in this to official, fully functioning, and publicly funded LGBTQ plus community centers. Of course, when it comes to proposing a variation of public subsidy, the major question from skeptics is, how much will this cost? How is it going to get paid for? And a report by the Boston Foundation of Boston and how Boston and other similar cities support cultural nonprofits, titled, quote, How Boston and Other American Cities Support and Sustain the Arts, helps outline how procedures like this can be done. Using cities that display similarities to Boston, quote, in terms of population, cost of living, and majority-minority status, and the recent introduction of major new public funding streams, the report cited a variety of methods that have been used across the nation to fund cultural community projects. Cleveland, for example, enacted a cigarette tax several years ago to raise artistic funding, whereas in Minneapolis, a sales tax to fund arts and culture projects was included in the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Act, which was passed through the combined efforts of arts advocates, and environmental activists. Now, it's important to note that these models are not necessarily things that should be followed exactly through Boston, because each city has their own different cultures and customs that need to be factored in, and also just the timing of each of these events. But it shows that Boston has the same capacity as these other communities to, quote, with the, quote, commitment, creativity, and consensus to make these changes, and similar solutions that can be best achieved among Boston residents and the leaders alike. Though some people might balk at the idea of their tax money going to such a project like this, the investment of a network of LGBTQ plus community centers can be greatly beneficial towards the city and all of its inhabitants, be they gay, straight, or somewhere in between. One benefit right off the bat is through maintaining a continued presence of the queer positive venues for the rapidly growing LGBTQ plus population in Boston. This presence is an issue that particularly affects queer and trans people of color. In an article with The Scope, members of the community note the sharp decline in events and spaces that are specifically designed for queer people, and especially have noticed that even the venues that are there are outside of their neighborhoods, places that they might not feel particularly safe. With one person noting that with a place like Machine in Fenway, the combination of people who are in non-gender conforming clothing and outfits and drunk sports fans from the suburbs might not always be an ideal combination. So with this in mind, keeping these spaces intact that are, when they're this far away, For neighborhoods like Jamaica Plain, which has 13.9% of their population identifying as LGBTQ, which is almost 6% more than the actual average of Boston in total, which also in Jamaica Plain there's a distinct lack of any notable spaces for LGBTQ plus people, establishing a citywide network with a Jamaica Plain representative would be a godsend for them. And beyond social repercussions, these spaces have potential to a world of good from a public health perspective. A GLSEN survey in 2013 showed that less than 5% of LGBTQ students had sex education classes that had positive representations of same-sex issues. And meanwhile, a Public Religion Research Institute survey in 2015 showed that just 12% of millennials had said that the daily sex ed courses in school had covered same-sex relationships. There's currently a dire need for inclusive and encompassing sex education programs